Welcome. We have a great webcast today for you, so thank you so much for joining us. I'm Amy Abel with the Conference Board, and today we will be continuing our series for the Global Leadership Forecast. Many of you may know about and heard of this research we have been doing, and we are doing a year-long series around all the interesting aspects of this research, and we'll dive into that in a second. But thank you for joining us. Today's focus is around financial services, leadership challenges and opportunities. So I'm very excited to dig deeper into the industry segment around this topic. Before I forget, here's what we will focus on. We'll hear about what C-level leaders are thinking about, specifically to financial services organizations. What keeps them up at night? Learn about leadership readiness. What does that mean when you have key leadership readiness and the behaviors associated with that? What does that also mean specifically for financial services? How are you and your organization preparing your leaders to take on the business challenges of the future? And finally, gain an understanding of what financial services organizations are doing. So we'll share some stories around how your colleagues and peers in the industry are tackling this challenge, because we all face this challenge, but we all have different businesses and we all have different challenges. How are we taking this on from a leadership perspective? Those of you that are interested in credits, please follow the instructions, type in your name and email, etc. in the space provided in the bottom of your screen. Thank you so much for that. And before we continue, let me introduce my guest for today, Liz Collins, who is Senior Manager in People Advisory Services for Ernst & Young. Liz, with a master's in organization psych from Columbia University, she has spent her career working with clients to develop data-supported workforce strategies in tandem with the client's talent management programs, their people risk programs, as well as leadership development activities. She works primarily in financial services industries with banking, capital markets, and insurance. So I'm very excited. Welcome, Liz, for joining me.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm excited to be leveraging your expertise as we dig deeper into this industry. So I think it'll be a lot of fun. All right, so let me give you the overview of the Global Leadership Forecast, and then I'll bring Liz back into the conversation as we dig deeper into what's going on for this industry. Many of you may know the Global Leadership Forecast we released last year in 2018 is the largest leadership development survey and research report of its kind. We have over 25,000, almost 26,000 leaders globally respond to the survey, where we are asking about leadership trends of today as well as looking into the future. You can see we had HR professional perspectives, right? We had a survey around the HR leaders view, the actual leaders view, global companies. We have 26 different industries, job functions. We also looked across demographics of age groups or demographic groups, I should say, as well as male and female ratios. So if you've been following along our series, you know that we've taken on cuts of the data and presented to you things around gender in Global Leadership Forecast, what's going on in leadership, what's going on in digital transformation, skills around leadership, what's going on in different countries. So lots of ways to present this data. And if you haven't seen it, by the way, you're welcome to go and download the report at your leisure. Oh, and this is, by the way, a fabulous partnership between the Conference Board, EY, and DDI. So thank you so much to our partners for this fabulous report. Let me get started with our first audience polling question. If the team would present, let me ask the audience, please help us. Which industry category best represents your organization that you're in right now? And those of you who are completing, thank you so much. And before I forget, as you're completing the polling question, during this webcast, we will be trying to involve your participation. So I invite you to join us. Type in your questions in the lower left-hand corner and just join us in the conversation. Ask, share a thought, share a reflection, and ask a question. We'd be happy to have your engagement around that. So let's close the polling question, please. Great. And you can see that almost over 50% are in other, actually non-financial services. So that's interesting. Thank you for listening in, because I think you'll learn some interesting things about this particular industry. But we do have a cut of all the representations of banking, insurance, wealth management, as well as other financial services. So great, so half of you are in financial services and the other half are not, but I think we'll be able to present either broad leadership practices that resonate, but also, of course, target in for the industry itself. And we actually have a second polling question, just to get you all warmed up. What do you think keeps your CEO up at night? Great question, right? And you can see the options: slowing economic growth in emerging markets, developing next-gen leaders, new competitors globally, failure to attract and retain top talent, and cybersecurity. We'll give it another 5 seconds, and then we'll close the polling questions. And whenever you're ready, perfect, thank you. So 38% of you said failure to attract and retain top talent as the top issue that keeps your CEO up at night. And not surprisingly, right after that is developing next generation leaders. Of course, all those other issues are a challenge, so they're not insignificant, but we definitely see a need, at least from this audience today, around the leaders as well as developing talent. So that's terrific. Let's go back to our slides, and I'm going to ask Liz to jump in, because what did our survey show and how did it reflect upon the audience that we have here today?
Absolutely. It looks like this audience has gotten their hands on the GLF, which is great, and there's so much more data in that, so we are really just skimming the surface. But as you'll see, what's top of mind is developing next generation talent and really attracting and retaining top talent. What's even more telling on this that you'll see on the slide is that only a third of leaders actually believe they have the right leadership to lead the organization through these business imperatives. So that may seem staggering, but I think that's where we'll get into in the detail how we can bring that other 66% along in this journey. I have a question for you, Amy, though, because I know you guys really focus on this at the conference board. How do these results stack up against what you're seeing, year over year as you ask about what keeps the CEO up at night?
Yeah, no, it's great. By the way, I'm still reflecting on 1/3 of our C-suite leaders believe we do not have the right leaders, right? So that means a very large majority of our leaders are basically not ready or not prepared. Yeah. Right? So that's definitely a little scary. So thanks for highlighting that. And yes, you're right. We at the conference board, we've been doing a research study. We call it the C-suite challenge, and historically the CEO challenge, where we basically ask C-suite executives what keeps them up at night. It's a very short survey, and we do this every year. And guess what? Over the last number of years, always in the top 1, 2, 3, maybe 3, but a huge need around the CEO's thoughts is developing next generation leaders and failure to attract and retain top talent. They might flip 1 or 2 depending on the year, but we continue to see that as a big push. And topics like cybersecurity or labor relations or global recession, a couple of years ago, global recession was very higher on the list. And cybersecurity, I think, that more recently has increased on the list, but they're not able to push off the next generation leaders and attracting and retaining talent. It's just a huge need. And so those of you out there learning and listening around this topic and doing this every day, we desperately need this help, right? All our organizations and our companies need your help. So that's great. All right, let's keep going. So despite that shocking statistics around financial services, so how are leaders preparing, or I shouldn't say how are leaders preparing, but we could definitely touch into that, but how are companies helping their leaders prepare? What do we do? How should we think about this? Because it seems quite overwhelming, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where what we found with the analysis is how we break down what the organization is trying to do. And then from there, understand the leader behaviors needed to drive that organizational strategy. So it's just breaking down the pieces in a few more steps to really understand what needs to happen. I think as leaders, everybody understands some of the high-level requirements, and we're not saying take those behaviors off the table. Those are important. But when you think about how you lead in the context of your business strategy, that's really where we want to focus on those specific skills. So if we go to the next slide, these are really, as DDI has done their research over the last several years, they've addressed that these are the preeminent areas that a business is driving. So they're either driving execution, which is about creating alignment and sustained operational effectiveness in order to ensure future viability. They're driving elevating performance, which is engaging others to bring the organization to heightened levels of performance and excellence. They could be shaping the future, which is about steering the organization toward new horizons, strategies, and structures. As well, they could be growing the business, which is creating strategies and approaches for growth that effectively respond to new and existing market opportunities. So what I will say is, A, these aren't created equally, but B, many organizations are doing one, if not more, of these strategies. So they may be executing in a growth mode at the enterprise level, and then within a specific division, maybe shaping the future with things like fintech or otherwise. So it's not that one size fits one organization, but the bigger message here is to understand what context the leader is being asked to operate in, whether at the divisional level or at the enterprise level relative to what strategy they're trying to drive.
That's great. And I know that we'll be digging into these 4 categories a little bit more in depth and also offering examples of how companies are tackling some of these. But I think it's interesting to know, like you said, it's significantly important to realize what is the strategy for the organization and how do the leaders fit into that, and then identifying the behaviors that would support that specific strategy, right? Because or maybe the question back to you is, do we cover all of them? Do we cover some of them? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so when you think about financial services, right, in the last several decades, it's been focused on execution and elevating performance, right? And I think as the market has shifted and as it's shifted so significantly from a digital perspective, AI, robotics, financial services organizations are faced with sort of, the efficacy of how they work. And they're really being forced to focus on growing the business and shaping the future in harnessing these different technologies and sort of really consumer patterns that are really shifting how they need to operate. And I think when we think about that, it's sort of stepping back, acknowledging the change. And what I'm not advocating here that you need to change your strategy, but when you draft out your strategy, test yourself. Are we really trying to execute here? Are we trying to grow? Are we trying to shape the future, right? Of that strategy we've drafted, what are we trying to accomplish here? So I'm not advocating that this is a strategy to take on wholeheartedly, but as these organizations map out their own, how does that fit in across one or more of these 4 areas?
And it's the intentionality, right, is what you're articulating, is that we're clear as an organization and as our leaders, which one are we doing? We may be doing one, we may be doing all 4, but that you're actually intentional why we're doing it, and then of course allocating resources appropriately.
Right. That's right.
Great. Okay, so I think that's a huge point. And again, I invite the audience to join us in the conversation by typing in your questions in the lower left-hand corner. But let's dig a little deeper, Liz, and tell us a little bit more. Oh, sorry, wait, we have a polling question first, and then we'll come back to digging a little bit deeper. If the control room could put up the next polling question. And you can see which of the following leadership behaviors is your organization focused on developing now. And I won't read the laundry list to you. Integration might be something like, synthesizing data points to analyze difficult issues, or leading virtual teams. I think many of us are challenged with that today. Even identifying and developing future talent. How do we support our long-term talent needs? So 3 more seconds, and then we can close out. Well, let's give it 5. It's a long list to read. Let's give it just 2 more seconds, and then we can ask the control room to close the poll. Okay. So if we can close the poll, please. Yeah. And you can see over 62% of you said identifying and developing future talent is what your organization is focused on developing right now, which is great, right? And the next one up is adaptability in your leaders, and maybe integration, right, which is around synthesizing data to analyze difficult issues. So all of that is part of some of the challenges that we have. Okay, great. Let's go back to the slides.
There's a polling question too.
Oh, there. Say that again.
There's a question at the left here.
Oh, yes, sure. Yeah. Let's take a thank you to the audience for submitting a question. And let me pass this to Liz. Do you find that there are some common behavior and technical capabilities that cut across the various business strategies? Great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. For sure, integration, but I think as we go through these relevant slides, Elizabeth, you'll see those common behavioral elements that are germane to each individual strategy. In the actual GLF as well, we focus on those broader leadership behaviors that cut across. So we'll focus on the specific strategies, but integration in particular is one that I can say cuts across, and we'll tap into that here as an example.
Great, great. Okay, let's jump into the first one, elevating performance.
Absolutely. So again, when we think about elevating performance, it's engaging others to bring the organization to heightened levels of performance and excellence. What you'll see in this graph here represents feedback from the survey where financial services institutions across banking, insurance, and wealth management opined on where they think they are in these skills in terms of whether or not they're effective in their organizations. So these bars represent organizations that believe they are somewhat to very effective on these behaviors. And again, the behaviors you'll see are on the top here: integration, leading virtual teams, and leading digitization. What those mean from a definitional perspective, we think about integration. It's about combining information from multiple sources to understand difficult problems. We talk about leading virtual teams. It's about forming, guiding, and motivating remote or dispersed teams. And when we talk about leading digitization, it's about leveraging technology to more effectively manage the workforce. In this behavior in particular, I want to highlight as an example of how we're seeing organizations bring it to life, right? And leaders actually leverage the digitization to make better workforce decisions. So in this example, it's a multinational bank that wanted to tap into productivity as a way to see if they could do more with the same or less, right? So I think we're all struggling with that, right? There's not more hours in the day. We need to be able to do more with less. In this instance, they wanted to understand how they could repurpose what people are doing or understand what they're doing more readily to make better decisions to really elevate the performance. So they tapped into an organizational network analysis technology. So I think a lot of us know O&A and we think about it more in the standard survey form. There are technologies out there now that are able to tap into your existing collaboration methods around email, calendar, Skype, even telephony, or even text message, right? How do people work today? And it can understand when and how your organization is working most effectively. And you can also look at how your organization is teaming. So you'll be able to link back the performance of a team or teams based on how they're actually operating together. So you can basically look under the covers and see how it's operating in practice day to day, and trend the data from over the course of 6 months to see if it's cyclical and how people work and when they work to get more productivity from them.
So can you give me a quick example of, just a quick one, just to help me think through how might it be used for what purpose, and then how does that translate back to the leader?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give a non-financial services one because I know half of our group is non-FS. We've looked at the high-performing engineers. So we were working with an organization that has a significant amount of engineers, and they were like, let's figure out, of these engineer population, there's clearly some that are more successful than others. What are they doing differently? And the assumption going in was that they were working with their heads down, just cranking through work, and that was what was really driving their productivity. And when you looked at the data, it told a different story. And that was that engineering was talking to marketing, they were talking to sales, they were communicating across the organization to get a better output. And that's what made them successful. And so they said, let's harness that way of how we work. And the only way they would have found this information out is leveraging this technology to do that. So it's very powerful.
Yeah.
I think when we think about behaviors, we think about them in pretty binary terms of something I'm doing or not doing. But it's just as important about what you're leveraging around you to make better decisions and drive better outcomes.
Of course. And in this day and age of complexity and chaos, needing to leverage others and others' knowledge, others' expertise makes perfect sense. But I can certainly understand the implications of how that would drive the organization to say, whoa, we should be doing leadership development differently. And what does that mean? And how can we encourage those that are not doing some of these successful behaviors that we've identified into doing some of those successful behaviors?
And digital is really big, right? I think this is just a prime example when you look at kind of AI and chatbots and all that different stuff to kind of help you manage through. When you think about it in terms of elevating performance, leaders, need to think in those terms now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I have a quick question around this specifically. Do regulatory and statutory issues have an impact on the effectiveness of O&A and digital collaboration in the industry? Good question.
That's a great question. So the tool in particular that I'm referencing has GDPR certification. They can operate in Europe. So from an actual organizational construct and being able to have that data available, they're working with other financial services institutions. So there's no issue from like a risk compliance perspective. What we're finding is how that data can be used to solve the specific outcomes that the organization is driving.
Right. Well, that's the gold.
In these companies, this organization in particular, they have so many algorithms that they can leverage and import to kind of make the analysis more streamlined, and then they can also pull back the data, not just in terms of productivity, but also look at the D&I, concerns as well. Kind of how are the different demographics in my organization working, whether it's demographic in terms of generational, male, female, even experience. So the more data you put in, the richer output you get from it. And they've really been able to tailor it.
Terrific, terrific. So before we go into the next category, one of the questions from the audience, how relevant do you think this research is outside of financial services sector? So I can start off with that. Actually, the whole research was designed to be completely industry agnostic. So we covered, I think at the beginning, we have like over 26 industries represented in the data that we have. And today's webcast specifically is digging into that particular slice of data around some of the financial services representation. But if you go into looking at the whole report, it's just a plethora of data because we have essentially 25,000 data points. They represent everybody and globally. Lots of countries, lots of different industries. So just sort of go ahead and play around and dig deeper, and hopefully that will find some of the details that you might be looking for, as well as look up our past webcasts that we've done. We've definitely taken on a global leadership forecast and women's leadership, for example. That was a nice topic. And so, different aspects of the different data points. So take a look at the webcast series and see if there's another one that might be more appealing to you. Okay, so with that, let's continue to the second category of execution.
Absolutely. And again, execution is about creating alignment, sustained operational effectiveness in order to drive future viability. Again, these bars on the left up here, on the left, really represent where financial services institutions believe that they are somewhat to very effective on these behavioral attributes, which are adaptability, empathy, and integration. And it's great. I think when we were going through the poll, adaptability was sort of a key item that came up, and that is maintaining personal effectiveness when experiencing major changes at work, right? So we have a little Darwinism coming in here, but I think it's important to acknowledge, right? We think about empathy, right? I think that word sometimes, feels a little soft, but it's really about deepening those relationships with others by perceiving and acting on their emotions. Again, which may, in the world of HR, emotions kind of, we want to keep things in financial services buttoned up. It doesn't mean we have to, share our deepest, darkest secrets, but I think it's understanding kind of where people are coming from. And we've seen a lot of activity in this in terms of using tools like HBDI to understand how people operate sort of in their steady state and in their stress state. Because there are, some emotional pieces that come forward, and as a team, if you can understand that and harness it, it makes it much easier to kind of get to what you need to from a task perspective. The third behavior is around inspiration. So that is motivating, increased employee energy and effort. And here is we'll go through this as an example, but I think inspiration, again, is something that we can't ignore in terms of getting people to bring their whole self to work, right, and really driving the execution they need to. So when we think about inspiration, the example I want to give is a multinational insurance company. They had changes at the top, and the new leader came in and said, we really need to set a formidable purpose that my employees can really engage with and drive forward and really believe in, and have that be motivating to them to come to work every day. And so EY has worked with them using one of our culture tools to understand and align and evolve the culture to inspire and motivate talent. So we're pulling back the onion a bit in terms of what are those elements of culture? What does it need to look like in terms of the purpose we're trying to drive? How do we motivate people then against these, tenets of the culture we're trying to drive? So really kind of digging deeper than just sort of saying, this is our purpose, let's go and do it. Understanding what it takes for the culture to evolve to drive that purpose. Because as you can appreciate, coming into a new organization, there's an existing culture that you can't ignore. And so understanding where they are to where you want to be, can be somewhat of an undertaking. But we've been able to use technology and research to really, jumpstart that analysis and to actually get them into execution on changing and evolving the culture.
And I love your choice of words from the new leader. I don't know if it was the leader's words or your words, formidable purpose. Mm-hmm. They want a formidable purpose. I've never heard of it described that way, but I think that sounds really great.
Yeah.
And it's really, like you said, not just any purpose, because we're all thinking of one, but we know there's a lot of research that shows that purpose and that mission is absolutely engaging for employees. And employees will join or leave your company based on that purpose and mission. And if it's a formidable purpose that they can get around or get behind, that could drive that engagement level, a significant factor. So
absolutely, and I think what we also see is it doesn't stop there. So you take that purpose and you understand the tenets and you embed it into your performance management, your development, your conversations. Mm-hmm. So it becomes part of the fabric of the organization. It's not just this high and mighty purpose that sits on a stool. Yep. People can put it into practice. And so that's another critical step that we didn't touch on here. But when you think about that inspiration, it's got to tie through to how the employee engages with the day-to-day and what they think, the kind of what's in it for me aspect of it.
So I had a question for you. I was just thinking through this from the adaptability perspective on this slide. And this is a pondering question. So you see that in banking, it appears that adaptability is significantly higher than the other areas of either insurance or wealth management. And I was just pondering, I wonder why. Is there any thinking or any pondering that you have of why that might be the case? Has it been a history, or what's going on in banking?
So I think one thing I'll call it, I think we can all relate to this, right? As consumers, with the advent of our smartphones and the accessibility of smart card, paying with your phone, there's a lot that's been really dictating that adaptability, and I think forcing people to have to move beyond really with external factors versus internally. But I can say from what I've seen in the banking industry so far, they're harnessing it, but they need to continue to harness it, right? So it's about being able to, as we talk about with execution, sort of doing more with the same or less. So I think they're further along only because of kind of the external factors that that are pushing them.
It makes perfect sense, right? The world has evolved quickly, and you're right. Just even from a personal usage perspective, the world of banking for me personally has evolved dramatically, and meeting the demands of your consumers and responding quickly, and it continues to change, all the time. And on one hand, it's interesting and exciting. On the other hand, I can, having worked in financial services, you need the systems to support that, right? You need the processes to support that. You need the people to support that, and the mindsets to support that. And that's not always so easy to execute. So I think that's a fair point of how they've been perhaps a little bit forced to do the adaptation a little bit more. Yep. Okay, great. So we, feel free again just to have all of you in our audience join us in the conversation by typing in questions in the lower left-hand corner. So let's go on to the next category and continue our conversations. Shaping the future.
Absolutely. And again, that's about steering the organization toward new horizons, strategies, and structures, right? So it's sort of going to the unknown. But again, in this day and age, we don't, roles, the businesses are going to look so different even 5-10 years from now. So you have to kind of, take a deep breath, grab that courage, and move forward. And it's really fun to see what's happening in the financial services industry around shaping the future. Because with such a group of smart-minded people and really effective people, I find that the strides that they're making across banking, insurance, and even wealth and asset management are significant. And I think the story that I want to share around this is really exciting, and I think will resonate with many of the folks on the phone, especially when we talk about next generation leaders. So again, just to orient everybody on the bar graph, what this is showing is how financial services organization responded to these behaviors, where they believe they are somewhat to most effective. And again, those three preeminent behaviors that come forward with shaping the future are cultural curiosity, which is appreciating and understanding factors needed to compete globally. Digital literacy, which is about developing and maintaining personal expertise in digital technologies, and identifying and developing top talent, and that is planning for and supporting long-term talent needs. And this, again, from our earlier polling question, I think was the top winner, and this is where we're going to zero in on an example as well. Because I think, kind of thinking about going into the unknown, not just what you're trying to do, but who you're trying to manage and bring along in that journey from an employee perspective. So we've got millennials and Gen Zs coming into the workforce and really harnessing the skills that they have and the capacity is really exciting and important and not to be overlooked. So we're finding, in this case, a multinational investment bank has sort of recognized this new wave of generation, the way people work coming in, and they're trying to harness that with workforce planning tools that are integrated with their other talent and technology tools. Just figure out the types of skills they have and the capacity they have day to day, week to week, month to month, as they look at the supply and demand of their workforce and really kind of how they're operating. So it's a great way to just not kind of put people in the role and let them go, but actually manage the supply and demand of your talent over time in a really dynamic and thoughtful way. So this organization, again, put in a workforce planning tool that really that's both linked technologically from a data perspective, but they can understand how those different generations, especially the millennial and Gen Z, the skills they're bringing forward and the capacity they continue to make available as they work more quickly than some of us do, and I think it's exciting and it's great. So how do we harness that and really help us shape the future?
So if we could expand on that example a little bit. So I understand they have a workforce planning tool, and it's connected to perhaps their existing like HRIS systems and things of that nature. So give me an example of what they're extracting or what they're doing, and are they realigning millennials to particular roles or tasks?
So that's a great question. At the task level, I can't speak to that specifically, but what I can tell you on the roles is they're toying with how millennials lead. And they're looking at the efficacy of them as leaders within the organization and leveraging this workforce planning tool to find areas where they can put them into to test their muster on that, which is really great. So they're not sort of taking that traditional tenure, approach, or you have to have worked in 5 different areas and had X number of experiences to be able to be considered a leader. They're sort of doing this piloting, right? Which is really kind of A/B test, however you want to qualify it. But they're being deliberate about the different opportunities they're putting them into based on the data they're getting back from the workforce planning tool.
So I love that, right? It's completely different than how we, like you said, you normally quote unquote do leadership development. So I'm just sort of imagining if the data is coming back and saying, these individuals have particular strength and particular behaviors that might resonate strongly in these particular roles, and should we test that out?
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's really interesting. And I mean, that only continues the theme that I have been hearing from some companies where, because of the chaos in the world in which we live, and the new theme now is about the future of work and how the work is different, and everybody's talking about how work is going to be different, and the jobs that we have are hard to identify, right, for today and in the future. So what does this mean? And some organizations, perhaps like this one, is taking on looking at the skills and the competencies versus like the job description.
That's right.
Right. But that's, really different than how we do things in HR. We're all about the jobs and the job descriptions, and I've written many job descriptions myself. So how do we think about that and transfer to a skills and competency perspective? Because that's what they're doing, right? That's what they're doing to assign these roles. I don't know,
making it more portable. Yeah, and I don't think they're kind of getting mired in the role stuff. I mean, it's important as you think about kind of how you track and manage the organization, the career pathing, and all that comes with it. There's actually a great article in HBR this month, similar to what we're kind of touching on, sort of the job descriptions and all that are sort of falling away, and this new wave is coming in, which is great.
Yeah. So it's great. Thank you for the reference for the article, and I think that just pushes our thinking, hopefully as HR professionals, right? That maybe in the future we need to be writing more skills and competency summaries versus job descriptions and whatever that means.
Yeah.
I know we're talking about the future and thinking about shaping the future. I also know of organizations that now when you go into their website, like you're looking for a job and you want to join this organization, historically you would look at a website and look at all the jobs that are open, and you kind of surf through that, and then you sort of hit the apply button and submit your resume. And I'm sure you hear the stories as well. Organizations are now, sort of, again, experimenting and turning that, right, where they are asking you to type in your behaviors, your skills, your competencies, and experiences. And then somehow the system comes back and says, you might be a great match for this role. Yeah. So
absolutely. And I think it goes even beyond that too, with like passive and active, folks that are looking for jobs, right? And I think, again, there's something to be desired and more understood about how that works, and Amy, as you're saying, not having it be, some really cookie cutter thing about what the organization thinks they need, but what you can bring to the table, right?
Yeah.
And how dynamic you can operate, across silos, across the organization. I mean, I think a lot of these skills, as you sort of alluding to, are portable, which is great. So let's tap into that, right?
Yeah, no, and that's exactly what these organizations are challenging themselves with, right? Yeah. But again, very different than how we view jobs and how we view the HR practice in this way. And by the way, this is all tech. This is all artificial intelligence. It's super, leading edge, and but that's maybe where our future is going. When we talk about shaping the future, how do we push that right into different ways of how we think about how work will be done, and then what our leaders need to bring to the table? How will they bring these behaviors to the table?
Yeah. And that's what's great about it. The way we collect data nowadays and the type of data we collect gives us a leg up on being able to start to answer those questions.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So a couple of quick questions coming in. Is the digital literacy related to identifying competencies for future leaders around embracing AI? I mean, I can share a little bit of thoughts. I wondered if you had some thoughts around that, Liz.
Yes, absolutely it is. The digital literacy is embracing AI. Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, you would argue it's not just AI.
No,
perhaps,
and that's
right?
what I think it is, right? I think it goes beyond AI, and it even looks at sort of the digital footprint of your employees and how they interact with your organization, you know, on a day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year perspective. I mean, we're seeing organizations from a digital literacy that are tapping into more social-focused mechanisms, even in the workplace, around Bonfire. A couple of the tools that really emulate sort of the personal and professional aspects of people that do a couple of things, right? I think it tries to make sort of the balance more equal, but it gives people a chance to bring that authenticity. And I think that's, you know, where we're finding people are most successful when they can be themselves and bring their whole self to work. And so that digital literacy piece, as much as it feels, you know, a little bit futuristic with the digital piece of it, I think it is an opportunity that folks should really understand and leverage when they think about how they want their employees to interact with their organization.
Yeah, no, and I think it's one of those aspects, digital literacy, where, you, like you said, it sounds futuristic, but it's actually today. It's actually here and now. And I've been doing some research around artificial intelligence and HR. And I also, when I started that project, thought, oh, you know, that's got to be a little bit in the future. And of course, what we're all realizing is that it's already here. It's not in the future. It's already here. Some are a little bit more leading edge than others, but it's definitely here today. So it's a little crazy how fast things change.
Well, and on that point, one of the things we've seen is reverse mentoring. So on that digital literacy piece in particular, at EY, we have said our, you know, staff, senior consultants are really bright and well educated in this area, and they're sort of integrating it seamlessly, professionally and personally, and they're helping upskill and bring along our leaders in the organization, which is really great.
Great example of, you know, even another approach to developing leaders, right? And that might be a great approach if your organization is taking on the challenge of digital literacy.
Absolutely, and bringing in a really, you know, fresh bunch of, you know, folks from college and, you know, other experiences that sort of fall in the millennial or, you know, Gen Z category.
Yeah, great. Oh, a couple more questions. Do you feel like we will lose sight of the technical side of the job, the history of a role? I guess given the evolution of more into skills and competencies versus a job description. I don't know. That's a tough one.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say, and I hold on tight to this because I'm one of those people that will just take as much data as I can and will never let it go. Because the way their systems are set up, you can sort of look back at kind of what was needed before and what is needed today in terms of how you store and house that data. So it's less that you're losing it, but sort of you can sort of track the evolution of those roles. And I think on that point, you'll find with the different cloud HR solutions, they're starting to sort of think more on the skills versus roles.
Perfect. Thank you. And then let's do one more question before we move on to our last category. Focusing on building talent against critical capabilities versus against today's roles aligns nicely with shift to building career experiences versus career paths. Yes, definitely. I mean, I have some thoughts on that, but I welcome yours.
Absolutely, and I think answering this question or appreciating this thought, you know, you can't sort of look at the behaviors in isolation. You have to look at the broader fabric of the organization and the sort of capability that they build around policies, procedures that enable people to kind of break down those silos and look at sort of those experiences cross-functionally, right? And to look at those skills cross-functionally. So there's a big reliance on the organization to be able to kind of move with you in that change. Yeah. I think it's absolutely the right way of thinking, because I think, as we said earlier, right, roles are evolving, and roles, you know, 5-10 years from now, we will exist that we don't know what they are yet.
Yeah, and yet another dramatic shift for HR and our mindsets, right, of an HR professional. It's about experiences, not about a path or a hierarchy or a ladder. And you know, again, many of our organizations are still structured that way, or we have policies that way. And but how do we keep thinking about it as it applies to this grand concept of the future of work and how our society and the way we work is changing? So, but it's very exciting, as overwhelming as it can be. I think it's very exciting to take on that and figure out how we can, as HR professionals, work with organizations to do that. Okay, so just in the interest of time, let's cover our last category, growing the business.
This is great, and I love this example because it's very close to my heart right now. I'm working with this current client. But when we think about growing the business, we think about it in terms of creating strategies and approaches for growth that effectively respond to new or existing market opportunities. And this example I'm going to give as well, it's cross financial services. It can go outside and can apply elsewhere, and it does already in many settings in manufacturing and elsewhere. But it's really pushing your people to operate and to think differently and to look at those opportunities differently. So those behaviors are really determination, integration, and intellectual curiosity. So when we think about determination, it's about displaying courage and tenacity for driving for results, right? So when you're growing something, you can't manage what you can't measure, right? So you want to have that results mentality and make sure that you're appreciating, am I actually growing? We think about integration, right? That's about combining information from multiple sources to understand difficult problems. And we touched on this competency as well earlier in one of the other strategies. But I think this is really important because in many organizations, Amy, as you alluded to, we are silos, right? And people are really just operating with that tunnel vision, and to really grow a business and to understand the different facets of how you can bring those pieces together and really harness that, integration is key. And then we think about intellectual curiosity, and that is actively seeking to understand the digital world and all its complexities. So I think that one is very, very interesting and exciting, and I think for some folks maybe a little cerebral, but I also think it's important that, whether it's you or someone on your team that has that curiosity, leverage it, right? Have them really start to dip into those different aspects of the digital world and the complexities, because we will need to be able to build those different connection points at some point. And this is really, as our example here, and putting into practice around integration. So as I said before, you think of integration in silos, but you also have to think about how are you enabling those people to work differently, to be more integrated, and to sort of speak the same language cross-functionally. And cognitive process tools around agile, lean, design thinking really give people that opportunity to sort of, you can take a part of IT and marketing, and if they're both operating in an agile fashion, they can come together and integrate more easily. And so this is an example where an organization is taking those different cognitive processes and integrating them at the enterprise, across the enterprise, which is great.
Can you explore that a little bit more?
Yeah, so they're training up their organization across these different methods to be able to effectively grow the business and to partner differently to drive and solve problems.
Okay, so they're all learning new tools and then talking perhaps differently.
That's right, and the way that the methods are being deployed and the learnings around them are reflective of how the business actually operates in practice. So it's a case that if I am, a financial advisor, and I work a lot with my sales team and my marketing team, and maybe even IT, tapping into sort of how I operate on a day-to-day and train the people around me and train us on a process that we would typically do and how we can either, make it more agile, lean, or even think about how we're solving the problem differently using human-centered design or design thinking.
Yeah, no, that's definitely. And, your point of, connecting more with, technology or IT, it's absolutely correct, because I talk to different financial services organizations. Actually, I talk to different organizations in different industries, and I have a little, sort of running joke that all organizations wants to call themselves now a technology organization.
That's right.
So I've got, automotive industries that say they're now a tech company, banking that now they're tech company. Yep. So everybody's now a tech company, but the technology obviously enables us to do different things, but we also need to be able to work with each other differently. in order to take advantage
Right.
of all those technologies, right?
That's right. And the technologists need to also understand what the business needs, right? And so if they're not tapped into that, they're creating and designing these, tools that may be suboptimal.
Yeah, no, it's terrific. We just have a quick comment that an audience member said attending our conference board webcast is one way to fuel her intellectual curiosity. Appreciate that support. Thank you so much for that. It's just different because we all need to continue to learn, right? Lifelong learning, you hear about that, or self-directed learning, continuous learning, and that's a hard one. Like, I mean, we talk. These are some of, and maybe I'll explore this a little bit more with you, Liz. When you talk about determination or intellectual curiosity, they seem almost innate. You either have it or you don't have it. How can organizations and how can we as HR professionals think a little bit more about supporting our leaders if we need, for some reason, to push a little bit more on those behaviors that we're deeming necessary to be successful if you want to grow the business? How do we help our leaders do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think these formal outlets, like you said, with the conference board and everything you all are doing is great. The other thing I've found that people are tapping into are podcasts, right? Kind of meeting people where they are and when they can start to consume that information. Articles, and then the networks, I think, are really key. So we're starting to see a lot more, and as I'm sure it's continued, the roundtables, right? And having different leaders from similar industries come together and talk about it. But I think the information is out there, and I think it's very accessible. And so giving that permission to go and source it is just as important as finding it.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure that all of us individually find that a great challenge because, as we all know, we're overwhelmed with data, things to read, things to do, and so it feels at times, hard to keep up. And where do you focus your energy? But like you said, sort of meeting them where they're at, whatever's easier or more accessible to your leaders. Help them make that connection point. If it does get too hard or it's too complicated, too cumbersome, so yeah, I might not go there either. So it's different ways that we can try to support our leaders. Really quickly, because we were getting questions, do you remember the HBR article that you referenced? Because we were getting a couple of questions and asking about it.
So it's this front. So the cover was the collaboration piece, and I think it was called Recruit or something around that related to talent acquisition. That was the focus of that. That was a specific article where they talk about passive and active and sort of sourcing the talent pool differently and pulling away from job descriptions.
Yeah, no, and we're definitely seeing a lot of changes in that talent acquisition market overall. I mean, we're not digging too deep into it, but especially with the use of AI and artificial intelligence in the talent acquisition space, it's changing the game. Let's just put it that way. Maybe we should do another webcast on that.
Definitely can.
And I have my colleague, Dr. Robin Erickson, who's an expert on this with our team here. But it's changing the game, but that's perhaps another conversation. So thanks for that. And it's a recent article you mentioned, so I think we can all sort of search on that. But this is another way to fuel that intellectual curiosity.
That's right.
Think about what we do day to day, and how is it changing, and then how should we think about doing it perhaps slightly differently in the future with tools or without tools?
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'm finding, which is really exciting, is in the millennial and Gen Z generations in particular, they're just as current, so leverage that population, give them the outlet to bring that intellectual curiosity forward into the organization.
Yeah, no, it's exactly. And there's no end to leveraging all the different knowledge bits of information that we all have, but of course it can be challenging, right? And how do we take advantage of that, or how do we leverage it? I mean, you gave an example for reverse mentoring, or different ways to do that. Maybe we could think of other examples of how organizations can. What about this one's hard. I think it's hard. Determination. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, because to me that's a tough one.
Well, so I will say I thank my financial services colleagues here because they scored really high on determination, really across the board, which was encouraging. And I think part of that is the DNA of the individual, and the type of person that comes forward and raises their hand and says, I can do this and I can operate in this environment.
Yeah. No, but you know what? That's the difference, right? So there is some of the DNA in there and the tenacity around that. But then somebody, who raises their hand, I mean, that's a behavior.
Yeah.
We can all raise our hands, whether you've got the DNA or not, right? But you have to think about raising your hand. And, if you're a little bit like me, you might be, oh my goodness, what am I raising my hand for? And I might be a little scared. But to take that on, right? Because that's how the difficult issues get resolved. It doesn't mean nobody expects everyone to know all the answers, but you can go out and find the answers and work with others to find the answers, or at least not even find the answer, find great ideas.
That's right, and that's why I think integration is such a nice, sidebar to that determination, right? I think, as you said, right, you can't do it in isolation, and you need that integration.
So actually, that's a great point, because that leads us into we have a polling question. Okay, sorry, my mistake. I have forgotten this polling question. We're out of time really quickly, but let's do it really quickly. How's that? Let me challenge the audience if the control room can bring this up. The last polling question. Are we able to bring it up? Oh, okay. Well, sorry, apologies. Minor technical difficulty. So let's skip that and go to the next, our final concluding thoughts, which is around, okay, we talked about the different issues that we have. We talked about the behaviors and the readiness, and great examples of how some organizations in the industry are tackling this readiness. How else can we prepare for this future? And, what are some of your thoughts around this?
Absolutely. You can't underestimate the behaviors that you need to drive readiness, and especially as it relates to the specific business strategies that you're trying to drive. So really taking back, and again, it's from the learnings from the GLF and what we've seen in practice, those behaviors are really key for leaders to be able to harness, whether it's leveraging technology and data to make better decisions around those areas, working together as a leadership team, those behaviors are key. I think the other thing is really that cross-functional support. So really making sure that we're not just looking at a certain division or part of the enterprise that's driving these behaviors. It really needs to be part of the fabric of the organization. And I think don't go it alone, right? Use the tools and diagnostics in the market to support your leadership readiness efforts. Don't feel like you have to sort of create internally. I think the accessibility and the time to delivery on these tools is pretty fast. You're not looking at these big ERP implementations that used to take 18 plus months and you weren't really sure. I mean, these cloud-based solutions make it really easy, and especially in the financial services world where you're dealing with a lot of risk and regulatory, it make it easy to use them and to use them pretty quickly and effectively.
And you gave a couple of examples already in this webcast, so thanks for that. But please go ahead.
Yeah, and I just, on the final note, I mean, you can't assume that your leaders know how to tailor how they need to lead based on your business strategy, right? If you have, 6 tenets you're trying to drive, how do those 6 match up against sort of the 4 broader business strategies that are sort of underpinned across those? And who from your leadership team is, driving each of those 6 areas or many of them, so they know kind of how they need to think about delivering, if it's growing the business or shaping the future is one of the tenets underneath, those different strategy items. They can then kind of take those behaviors and bring them forward. So really helping them understand what does that mean then from a behavioral perspective.
Yeah, no, terrific. Just great thoughts to keep in mind, right, as we take this information, process it, and maybe go back and talk to our colleagues or our boss and engage others across the organization. We can start having those conversations to fuel, change or things that we want to tweak in our practices. And I really appreciated you bringing in some of those financial services insights based on, all the work that you do, how as an industry, we've always been pretty good on execution, right? We know how to do that. But that's great, and we still need to execute, of course, but to think about the future, growing the business, and where how to shape that, and where do we want to go, and how do we think about the future? All of those are really those are tough things. I mean, we've done this before as an industry, but it's an interesting turn of events recently, right? With lots of changes, lots of demographic changes, lots of societal changes, lots of technology changes. So all of those just combined make it just a little bit more exciting, if that's the word you want to choose. And how do we help our leaders do that? We hear that as a consistent theme, that we do have really great, smart leaders, but maybe they're not quite prepared for what our future now needs, at least for the next foreseeable future. And how do we help them get there?
That's right.
Yeah, so maybe I can just conclude with that and say thank you so much, Liz, for joining us. We've got a couple of comments of a great session, so thank you for that.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
And I know your expertise is very well valued and welcome in this conversation around what can we think about, in the industry as well as outside of the industry, and how do we all take on that challenge?
Yeah.
So with that, I'd like to say thank you to you, the audience, for joining us. And we have a webcast next month, continuing our series in the Global Leadership Forecast, where we're taking on HR's new role. Are they up for the challenge? That's pretty interesting to think about. So please do join us with Danny Farron from EY. I will partner with him to talk about this and what does it mean for all of us. And finally, if you would like to join us for our upcoming Leadership Development Conference, you can get a discount by using the code. So again, thank you for joining us today. I'm Amy Abel with the Conference Board.